Kristen is just the most wonderful person I've ever met. She's incredible in so many ways. So kind and caring and sharing. And I just can't wait to spend the rest of my life with her.
In the 16th century, the Swiss-German doctor Paracelsus said, "The difference between medicine and poison is in the dose." In other words, and directly, what serves to cure when taken in excess can also be fatal. We can rarely control addiction, much less overcome it. Without noticing it, we're already completely addicted to a substance or a habit that, despite being pleasant in the short term, is usually devastating as a whole. That is the great danger of drugs. Consequently, they end up destroying everything, and sometimes even people around them. Today's case talks about love, about how true and selfless love can save a lost life, at the same time that excessive and unhealthy love can overturn basic moral principles and lead someone to eliminate anything that prevents this love from being fulfilled. This is the story of Kristin Rossum and Gregory Dillas. Kristin Rossum was born on October 25, 1976, in Memphis, in the state of Tennessee. She's the eldest daughter of Ralph and Constance Rossum, both prominent college professors, and her two younger brothers are named Brent and Pierce. In 1991, at the age of 15, Kristin moved with her family to Richmond, Virginia, after her father assumed the presidency of Hampton-Sydney College. There, she entered St. Catherine's School, an exclusive boarding school for girls. At this time, Kristin began to show more rebellious behavior, starting to drink and smoke. She experimented with marijuana and other illicit drugs, and from 1992, at 16, she became a methamphetamine user. In 1993, during a heated argument between Kristin and her father, Ralph accused her of hiding drugs in the backpack she was holding. He tried to take her backpack by force to investigate, and the two ended up getting involved in a physical fight. Ralph squeezed his daughter's arms so tightly that he hurt her. A few months later, Kristin was caught again carrying drugs, and this time police officers arrested her. But she only spent a few hours at the police station before her parents were able to pay bail. After these events, Kristin became aware that her life was taking an undesirable direction and decided to stop using drugs before entering college. She managed to get clean, and her improved grades ensured that she was accepted into the educational institution she desired. In 1994, at age 18, excited by the prospect of a new beginning, Kristin went to California to attend the University of Redlands and moved into the campus dorm. However, a few months later, she relapsed and went back to drinking. When Kristin wanted to buy drugs in a quantity she could stock up on, she traveled almost 3 hours by car to the city of Tijuana, near the border with Mexico. It was on one of those trips, in February 1995, that Kristin met Greg Dillas. They were on a pedestrian walkway in Tijuana when they collided. After laughing and apologizing, they began talking. From then on, Greg and Kristin became inseparable, fell in love, and spent much of their free time together. Greg Dillas was born on November 12, 1973, in the state of Illinois. His parents, Marie and Yves, were born in France. Just like Kristin, Greg had two younger brothers, Jerome and Bertrand. He was a brilliant college student, studying biology at the University of California and living alone in an apartment in San Diego. Greg always knew about Kristin's addiction, but he stood by her side and encouraged her to stop doing drugs. With his love and support, Kristin was able to stay drug-free. After a few months of dating, she moved into his apartment. In the second semester of 1995, she changed her option in higher education enrolling in biochemistry at San Diego State University. The following year, Greg completed his degree and began working as a business development manager at a biotechnology company. In 1997, while in her senior year at university, Kristen began interning at the San Diego County Coroner's Office, where she worked as a toxicology assistant, a role that provided her with free access to a wide variety of chemicals. In 1998, when she graduated with honors and obtained her degree in biochemistry, Kristen was hired as a toxicologist, working for the county of San Diego. After 4 years of a stable and happy relationship, Greg and Kristen married in June 1999.
Kristen is just the most wonderful person I've ever met. She's incredible in so many ways. So kind and caring and sharing. And I just can't wait to spend the rest of my life with her.
However, a year and a half later, on November 6th, 2000, Kristen called 911.
911 emergency.
Yes, my husband is not breathing.
Okay, is he there with you at 8150, apartment 204?
Yes, he is. He's in bed. He's cold.
Okay, try to get him off the bed and onto the floor right now, okay? And I'll work with you, okay?
Oh, God.
Now listen to me, okay? I want you to put your ear next to his mouth and see if you can feel or hear any breathing, or if you can see his chest rise, do that now.
No.
He's not breathing? Okay, I'm going to tell you how to give mouth to mouth, okay? And we're going to do this until help comes and takes over, okay? Okay, 2 more breaths. Pump his chest 15 more times. Okay, 2 more breaths. You're doing fine.
Within minutes, paramedics arrived at the scene. Because Greg had very few vital signs, he was quickly transported by ambulance to the nearest hospital. Unfortunately, at 10:16 at night, Greg Dillas was officially declared dead. He had turned 27 just 6 days ago. Greg's death seemed very suspicious from the beginning, and to understand this incident better, we need to talk a little about what was happening at Kristen's work. Drugs were being stolen from her stash, and she was having an extramarital relationship with her own boss. Kristen and Greg had been married for less than a year when a new doctor arrived to take over as head of the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office. Dr. Michael Robertson, a 32-year-old Australian man who was also married, was hired as the forensic laboratory manager and became Kristen's immediate boss. Michael and Kristen eventually became attracted to each other, and before long, they began an affair outside of their marriages. They tried to be discreet and keep this relationship a secret, but all their co-workers knew what was happening between them. The relationship between the two evolved very quickly. They were not just lovers involved in an extramarital affair, but rather, they were like a boyfriend and a girlfriend. They even exchanged letters and emails with intense declarations of love and promises of a future together. As a toxicologist, Kristen was responsible for drug analysis on the deceased bodies. She also received the deposit of any medication or drugs catalogued and managed, which had been seized at a crime scene until official removal by state officials. It turns out that, around September 2000, she relapsed and started using methamphetamine and other drugs again. Precisely at that time, some employees began to notice embezzlement from the medication deposit, which raised suspicions that someone was diverting such items from the laboratory. In late October 2000, Kristen and Michael attended a weekend-long medical conference at a hotel. During the event, They didn't seem to worry about disguising their romantic relationship and behaved in public like a couple. The theme of the conference was fentanyl, an opioid analgesic medication used to control pain. Fentanyl is currently well known due to numerous cases of overdose caused by it in recent decades. However, at that time, the drug was a substance rarely used outside the hospital environment, and therefore, toxicologists knew little about it and did not even test it in autopsy examinations in cases of overdose death. When Kristin returned home after the conference, Greg noticed that his wife looked different. She seemed cold and distant. Kristin began to insinuate that she was unhappy in her marriage and proposed that they consider a temporary separation. Greg, a faithful, dedicated, and passionate husband, obviously disagreed with that and was deeply shaken by the suggestion. It wasn't long before, on November 2nd, 2000, he found out about the affair between Kristin and her boss. He found one of the love letters Michael had written to her and decided to confront her. He asked her to leave her job and stop meeting him. But Kristin wasn't intimidated. She said she wouldn't quit and that she didn't even intend to end her relationship with Michael because she really wanted to divorce Gregory. 4 days later, on the morning of November 6th, 2000, Kristin noticed that Greg was unwell. He appeared disoriented, drowsy, and had slurred speech. Then, at 7:40 a.m., she called her husband's workplace and left a voicemail, stating that he wouldn't be there because he was ill. 20 minutes later, Kristin left the house to go to work. About an hour after arriving there, co-workers noticed that she was crying in Michael's office, but they didn't know why. At lunchtime, around noon, she left work and went home to check on Greg. She stayed for about 30 minutes and then went to a small market where she bought items to have for lunch with her husband. After they ate lunch, Greg went back to bed and Kristin returned to work. However, an hour later she came out again, saying she was going to check if Greg was okay. She only stayed home for about 20 minutes and went back to work. She remained there until the end of the day, and at 5 p.m, she went back home. At 6:30 in the evening, Kristin left the apartment once again to go to the store and bought a few more items. But this time, she took a little longer shopping. Kristin didn't get home until 8 o'clock at night. Upon entering the house, she found Greg lying in bed, apparently asleep. She then went into the bathroom to take a shower. She changed clothes, lay down on the bed, and as she approached Greg, realized that he wasn't breathing and his body was cold. At 9:22 p.m, Kristin called emergency dispatch to request assistance. San Diego County Police were notified of the incident and arrived at the apartment around 11 p.m. At the hospital, Kristin, in tears, said she believed that her husband had taken medicine to kill himself, and it seemed that it was actually a suicide due to an overdose of medicine. However, detectives noticed something very peculiar. In the couple's room, red rose petals were scattered all over the floor, and they also did not find any empty bottles of the medicines allegedly used by him. Around midnight, Kristin arrived at the apartment, accompanied by a man she introduced to the police as a co-worker. This man was in fact her boss and lover, Michael. A police investigator spoke with Kristin for about 20 minutes. Kristin reported that, during lunch together in the apartment, she asked Greg why he was so groggy in the morning, and he replied that he had taken some clonazepam and oxycodone, a powerful opioid painkiller with almost twice the power of morphine. The next morning, Greg's body was transported from the hospital to the San Diego County Medical Examiner's office, Kristin's place of work, where specialists would perform the autopsy examination. Initial blood tests revealed the presence of clonazepam and oxycodone, which seemed to confirm Kristin's report to police and hospital staff. However, Greg's family and friends could not believe the hypothesis of intentional or accidental suicide. He was a person averse to any drug. One of his brothers, Jerome, was deeply unhappy with the theory and suspected that Kristin may have been involved in some way in her husband's death. Jerome then made contact with the San Diego Police Homicide Division and shared his suspicions. He warned that, as she was an employee of the laboratory where the autopsy would happen, this could compromise the reliability of the results, given the apparent conflict of interest. On behalf of Greg's family, Jerome requested an independent laboratory to perform the tests, and that's when some things started to come to light. The autopsy report performed by this independent laboratory determined that Greg had been dead for at least 2 hours before Kristin's call to emergency services. There were signs of bronchopneumonia, a condition caused by a buildup of lung secretions that occurs when a person is not breathing or is unconscious for an extended period. Another intriguing aspect was the amount of urine contained in his bladder, almost half a litre, which represents a highly uncomfortable volume for a conscious person. To give you an idea, a person with 150 millilitres of urine in their bladder already feels the need to urinate. Greg had more than triple this amount. This evidence led to the conclusion that he was unconscious for a long time, estimated between 6 and 12 hours before finally dying. There was a large concentration of fentanyl in the stomach, in addition to a small amount of clonazepam and oxycodone. According to the independent medical examiner's report, the amounts of clonazepam and oxycodone were within a range considered therapeutic use. They would therefore be sufficient to make a person fall asleep, but insufficient to cause death by overdose. The most significant factor in the necropsy was, without a doubt, the high concentration of fentanyl in his body, which would be almost 100 times the amount needed to cause a person to overdose. It turns out that the San Diego County Coroner's Laboratory did not regularly test for fentanyl in autopsy exams because, as I said at that time, this substance was considered rare and little related to voluntary consumption due to addiction. However, the independent laboratory's autopsy protocol already included testing for fentanyl in its procedures, and only for this reason could the presence of the drug be detected. The final result of the autopsy report determined that the probable cause of death was acute fentanyl poisoning. Investigators interviewed co-workers and some people close to Kristin, who confirmed that the romance between Michael and her was well known and notorious. Dr. Michael himself confirmed that the two began a relationship about a month after he arrived at the laboratory. In this way, the police were then able to establish a probable motive for a homicide. The fact that Kristin was a toxicologist with extensive access to various drugs and chemicals put her in the position of someone with the necessary means to carry out a murder by poisoning. Additionally, as an employee of the county coroner's laboratory, she knew that fentanyl would not be tested for in Greg's autopsy. At that moment, the police were already convinced that the death was a case of murder, and Kristin became the main suspect. On November 22, 2000, Kristin was called to an interview at the police station in the presence of two investigators. For the first time, she was questioned in depth about the events surrounding Greg's death. In short, Kristin repeated her version, in which she believed that Greg had done it intentionally, because, according to her husband was very numb on the morning of his death. He told her that he had taken clonazepam and oxycodone. When police officers asked where Greg had obtained these prescription medications, Kristin said they belonged to her and were left over from her previous years of addiction. According to her, Greg was in depression, as their marriage was going through a challenging phase. She confirmed that she was having an affair with her boss, and Greg freaked out when he found out. They ended up fighting, and she even asked for a divorce. One of the investigators questioned her about the rose petals scattered across the bedroom floor. She said that the week before, Greg had given her a bouquet of red roses as a birthday present. Kristen theorized that scattering the roses across the bed and floor would be a kind of farewell letter from Greg, or a final dramatic gesture of love, indicating that he couldn't live without her. The inspiration would have come from her favorite film, American Beauty. After 3 hours of interrogation, Kristen was released. However, the investigation procedures continued. San Diego police obtained a search warrant for Kristen's workplace. There, they obtained records of every drug shipped and used in the county over the past 2 years, and what was revealed was overwhelming. As I mentioned earlier, employees of the forensic laboratory had already suspected a possible embezzlement of drugs stored on site. The police search and seizure action found a catalogued ampule of fentanyl, but it was empty. It was also found that 15 fentanyl patches and 10 milligrams of fentanyl tablets were missing from the warehouse. In addition to fentanyl, quantities of clonazepam, oxycodone and methamphetamine were also missing. There was no embezzlement of any other drug or substance, only the 3 medications found in Greg's body, and the drug that Kristen had possibly started using again, methamphetamine. Because those findings were revealed to the laboratory's superior, Kristen and Michael were removed from their positions until the police investigation was completed. The evidence collected by the police, although abundant, was still considered circumstantial. Until new evidence strengthened the accusations against Kristen. The rose petals that Kristen claimed were from the bouquet she received weeks earlier on her birthday were fresh. They didn't look wilted like you'd expect, from flowers cut almost 2 weeks ago. Another thing was that the receipt for purchases made by Kristen at the market at 12:41 p.m. on November 6th, the day of Greg's death, indicated that she had purchased a variety of items, including some roses. 7 months after Greg's death, on June 5, 2001, Kristen was arrested on murder charges. She was detained for 6 months until her parents mortgaged the family home to pay bail of $1,250,000, and Kristen was released to await trial in freedom. Paying the exorbitant bail amount left her family without the resources to cover the costs of a private legal defense, and Kristen had to rely on the public defender's office to represent her in court. At that moment, the case had already generated considerable national attention. All the media focused its attention on that woman, nicknamed the American Beauty Killer, an allusion to her favourite film, where the most iconic scene features actress Mena Suvari naked and surrounded by thousands of red rose petals.
The charges are just not true. I did not harm my husband in any way, and I believe that'll come out in court. It's hard not to be bitter that 6 months has been taken out of my life. I just look forward to the resolution of all of this and to the time when I can carry on with my life and my family with there.
The trial began in October 2002, practically 2 years after Greg's death. The court relied on the testimonies of more than 50 witnesses, including Kristen herself. The prosecution's thesis was that she had been planning her husband's death for some time and decided to take action after he threatened to expose her at work. The method chosen was fentanyl poisoning. Kristen allegedly gave oxycodone and clonazepam to drug Greg and then administered fatal doses of the drug. Experts testified that the amount of opioids found in his system would be enough to make him unconscious and stop breathing. The most plausible hypothesis is that the medications were administered at various times throughout the day by Kristen. The fact that Kristen was coming and going in the apartment on the day of his death could be vital, as she could continue to apply the fentanyl, dose by dose. The prosecution presented all the abundant evidence collected by the investigation, such as the presence of Kristin and her boss and lover at the fentanyl conference, the disappearance of drugs from the warehouse under Kristin's responsibility, the fact that, as a coroner's laboratory employee, Kristin knew in advance that the protocol did not include testing for fentanyl, in addition to contradictory statements that included the issue of the rose petals being from weeks before, and there being a receipt that indicated that she had purchased the item on the day of Greg's death. The defense argued that Greg actually died from fentanyl poisoning, but that he took the drug on his own initiative. He would have chosen to end his own life after discovering that his wife was cheating on him with her boss. As for the receipt indicating the purchase of the rose, they claimed she had bought it for Michael. In court, it was suggested that Dr. Michael, her lover, could have helped her take the drugs, or at least turned a blind eye to allow her to divert them. However, during the trial, no charges were brought against him as an accomplice. After 3 weeks of court sessions, the jury deliberated for 8 hours and reached a unanimous verdict. Kristin Rossum was found guilty of first-degree murder, and the sentence set by the judge was life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later, Dr. Michael was indicted as a co-conspirator in the crime, but the case did not proceed due to a lack of evidence. He returned to Australia and is considered a respectable doctor. The sad irony in this case is that Greg's love saved him from drugs, the life of the person who would later end his life. And unfortunately, this is how he will be remembered by his family, friends, and all those who knew him. A brilliant and generous person whose only mistake was dedicating his love to someone who would become a danger in his life.